Alii, aloha mai e, Fakaalofa lahi atu, Fakatalofa atu, Hãfa adai, halo, halo olaketa, Iakwe, Iakwe orana, orana, Malo lelei, Malo ni, Mauri, ni sambula vinaka, Noa'ia, Tālofa ni, Talofa lava. Welcome and good day. Hi everyone, my name is Chochi Ravulo and I'm so excited about having you all here for our Mental Health Talanoa Research and Resources launch. Thank you so much for being here and being in space with us as we talk about all things associated with this very exciting research project that has happened over the last couple of years. And this particular launch will profile our actual document, our report that has been now put together and put out into the world as soft copies, which we'll review as part of our Talanoa, our conversation today. We're also going to get them all printed up. That's in the process. And as you may have noted, when you registered for this event, we're super keen to get those posted out to everyone. So welcome to this event. I'm going to get some of my other co-authors and co-hosts to introduce themselves. Ursula.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ursula. I was the project officer for this project, Mental Health Talanoa. Yeah, and I'll pass it on to Shannon.
Hey everyone, my name is Shannon Side. I was a research project officer for the project. It's lovely to see some familiar names and welcome to all our guests tonight. We're excited to have you here.
Thanks, Shannon. What we're wanting to do is proceed with sharing now the report itself, and we thought we'd start by actually looking at some of the acknowledgements associated with the report itself and the actual research project itself as well. But before I do that, and this is something that we've intentionally noted from the actual documents, is acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the lands in which this work was carried out. So as you can see, he would like to acknowledge the Darug and Daryl people of the lands in which this work was carried out and to pay our respects to elders past and present. We also acknowledge that such lands are still considered stolen as sovereignty was never ceded. We strive both personally and professionally to work collaboratively with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Too often, Indigenous ways of knowing, doing, being, and becoming are seen as irrelevant or outmoded, but we strongly disagree. We should be striving to work together to meaningfully include such perspectives to influence and impact what we do across our various spaces and places, and to ensure a collaborative approach can occur. And as you can see, our chat box is open for all participants to interact with. And I'm so excited to see people saying hello to each other. But I also want to encourage wherever you might be zooming in from, whether it's here in Australia, in Aotearoa, or even the islands themselves. I know there are some of us joining us from the Pacific Islands themselves. I would love for you to put in the chat box your own acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands in which you might be zooming in from. So this is something that I've started to see practice when I've attended meetings via Zoom, is an encouragement for participants or people that are sharing this space to, in the chat, acknowledge the lands acknowledge the elders and the peoples from the lands on which they are zooming in from. So go for it. I'd love for people to actually put that into the chat box as part of our shared Talanoa. And I think it's really, really important that we continue to do that. This project very much has been focused on this idea of Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, this idea of Pacific Indigenous ways of knowing and doing as Indigenous peoples ourselves. So I think it's very, very important that we continue to see that in what we do. And you can see here from our acknowledgements before we continue on as well, this project was made successful because of the people that you can see in the screen, on in front of you. So we had people from the core group, we had our respective funders, Western Sydney Primary Health Network, Southwestern Sydney Primary Health Network, the Nepean Blue Mountains Primary Health Network, and the New South Wales Ministry of Health, and the respective staff within those particular funding organisations. So a big vinaka level for your support from a funding point of view. Going back to the core group, you will hear me talk more about them very soon in regards to how this project was instigated. We also then had our Mental Health Talanoa steering group and also our Mental Health Talanoa reference group. We also had some Pacific survey assistants, and we also had support from our statistical analysis support from a colleague from the UNSW. We also had a wonderful group of Pacific Indigenous people from across the Pacific Islands themselves that were involved in putting together one of our very exciting resources. So we're also grateful for them. And of course, we're so grateful for the participants in general, Pacific people from Greater Western Sydney that were involved as participants in the research project itself and in providing the support to engage in this project as well. So let's continue on and loving again all the chats that's happening in the chats on Zoom. So encouraging people to engage in that way as well. So what we thought we might do is actually provide an overview of the actual project itself, how it came together, and how this project actually was then mobilised off the back of various Talanoas around mental health. So it wasn't an accident that this research project was called Mental Health Talanoa, because it started by the community, our Pacifica communities, having Talanoa with various industry partners and stakeholder groups, including those in the community, those in government entities, from health to education. And you can see here that this is a picture from actually, I think this was one of our first meetings that we had with a whole heap of stakeholders from Greater Western Sydney to actually start this Talanoa around Pacifica mental health and wellbeing. And it was through this particular conversation that we were able to then look at the scope to do this work that we're presenting to you now in this report. And so this presentation will further highlight the different sections of the actual report itself, the document, which we've called Research and Resources. And it actually highlights the different, or the 4 different components that made up our research project that then led to this particular resource. So the initiative was the Mental Health Talanoa research project was instigated by the Pacific Mental Health Initiative. And this Pacific Mental Health Initiative was made up of the core group members. So the names that you saw on the in the acknowledgements. So that includes, and I'm going to go flick back. So that includes Sani Apiaki, Mahara Orana, Melissa Balilaketu, Malay Mifruen, myself, Alimonu Tamapeo, and Delma Thomas. And it was through those conversations that we then started to speak with representatives from the funding bodies. And our key representatives from our funding bodies really helped us to actually form those conversations towards funding. In particular, we had in-depth conversations with Mark Reynolds from the New South Wales Ministry of Health and Taniwai Tokia. We also had some real in-depth conversations with Sarah Bowe from West. And I note that a lot of these people are actually in this space with us at the moment. So they were actively involved in having those initial conversations as part of that. Here is actually some of the core group members. You can see them actually right here alongside some of the steering committee group members as well. So it was through this Pacific Mental Health Initiative, this sort of umbrella group, that we were then able to then look at 2 key sort of outputs from this particular initiative. One of those particular outputs was known as the Pacific Mental Health First Aid Facilitators Project. And that's where there was additional funding that was made available to provide scope for Pacific people to be trained up as mental health first aid instructors, and to then go out into Pacific communities within probably Western Sydney to actually roll out the mental health first aid course, which is all about improving and increasing mental health literacies across communities. The other key output from the Pacific Mental Health Initiative was the Mental Health Talanoa, this research project that has enabled us to do this work within the actual research itself. And it was through those particular buckets of money that again came from the funders themselves that Western Sydney Primary Health Network helped oversee alongside the other primary health networks that enabled us to actually create the Pacific Mental Health Initiative. As part of the development of the Mental Health Talanoa research project, we developed this, what we call the FRET model. FRET by definition is this small little wave that makes or has a little ripple effect. And we intentionally called it the FRET model because it was all about creating formation. So we came together as a community group through community engagement. It was about research, so community collaboration. We also were focused on education, community resources, and training, community development. So the idea was that these were known as phases, not stages, phases. And it was through these 4 particular phases that we were able to inform the research project in and of itself. And the idea of this FRET, this little wave that had this ripple effect, was very much to note that the formation phase, which included, and I'll unpack this in a second, which included our steering group and our reference group, were formed to then actually provide feedback on our research, on our education, on our training. And our training and education and research then helped our formation. So you can see the wave would go back and forth and actually have a ripple effect across each of the phases. And we intentionally did that because, of course, as Pacifica people, we are connected by the ocean. We are connected by the seas. And for us, the wave analogy or the metaphor is an important part of how we are connected as Pacifica people. Even though we might be the diaspora here in Western Sydney, we're still very much connected to the lands across Oceania. So that wave analogy was used to also highlight the phases of the project itself. The other key thing to note here was that there were also 4 different factors or variables that also impacted on the way in which we undertook our research project. So we also wanted to understand what was happening with individuals. We also wanted to understand what was happening with families and in the community, but also how the various systems have an impact on the way in which individual families and communities operate and exist. Some of those systems, of course, include the education system, the legal system, the health system. How do those particular systems have an influence in the way in which Pacifica people understand their mental health and well-being? So it was through the first initial phase of formation that we then moved into this notion of research. And I'm going to hand it over to Ursula and Shannon to just give some of their reflections about this phase of our initiative, of our project. Ursula and Shannon.
All right, I'll start us off. Yeah, so the research project involved initially interviewing, or doing surveys rather, with over 200 people. We met in various places, so shopping centres, Pacific events. Some of us here tonight obviously took part in that. Getting an overall understanding of how mental health is perceived with some very general questions. So yeah, it was interesting to make those connections initially, and we really thank some of the key people that helped us with that, particularly Malami Fruin, and were really helpful with that. And it was basically just gauging, as you do with surveys, gauging the response from community and seeing what they considered to be, I guess, some of the areas where they might see within themselves or family members particular areas of concern and how we would gauge that then as a research team. So that was the first phase in the research project. Ursula, did you want to have a bit of a chat about the Talanoa sessions from there?
Yep, so I guess off the back of that, we had 4 Talanoa sessions via Zoom. And then I guess we had some really helpful in-depth conversations, and we were able to identify some key themes. And then we took that and we were able to come up with the thematic summary. So just kind of break that down and put that into our tables to kind of inform what we were doing moving forward.
And it was interesting to see just the overlap, I suppose, although the groups that were organising those Talanoa sessions, although they were obviously very diverse people groups, we found that we were hearing very similar stories on particular topics that began to emerge, and obviously we'll explore those later in this presentation. But I felt there was quite a synergy between the different groups. It was reflected in the survey data as well. So there was some quite strong resonances across the model in terms of the research.
Thanks, Shannon, Ursula. As you can hear, our research phase was really about being able to engage collaboratively with our participants, with our Pacific communities. And again, our steering group and our reference group provided feedback on the various tools that we used. You can see we use surveys and Talanoa sessions as part of our approach. And as mentioned, through this particular engagement, we were able to actually get a better understanding of what was happening when it comes to these particular perspectives. I should note, you've got this complex looking table in front of you, so I will explain that in a second. But I will note that our research project really had 3 key areas that we wanted to achieve. The first one was looking at this idea of prevalence. So what was the prevalence of mental illness amongst Pacifica people in Australia? And we wanted to look at this notion of symptoms. What are possible prevalent symptoms associated with mental illnesses? The second one was looking at the notion of morbidity, impact of having a mental illness. And then the third area was looking at help-seeking behaviour alongside workforce development. So it was within those sort of 3 key areas that our research tools and our engagement with people out in community was then developed. And you can see here, going back to this complex table, we use something called the SRQ20. And this was an established tool that was utilised by the UN. And the idea across different community groups, especially diverse community groups globally. And the idea with the SRQ20 is to provide scope from people from those respective diverse community groups to provide feedback on a series of 20 questions, 20 factors that enable us to then understand what sort of symptoms, so symptomology, may be associated with that particular ethnic community group experiencing mental illnesses. So the idea was that ethnic community groups across the globe may experience mental illnesses in different ways. And the idea behind using the SRQ20 was to look at how do Pacific people experience mental illnesses? What are the common symptoms associated with having a possible common mental disorder, a CMD? And how does that then occur, and how is that then understood? And you can see here that there are factor loadings. So I won't go into too much details. You can read it out in our report. So download and you'll receive a copy soon, especially if you've registered with your shipping details. And you can see here that there were certain factor loadings. You can see in the green here, the higher the number, the higher the loading that symptom may have had to those common mental disorders. Okay, so the idea was that we were looking at how certain symptoms that are from the SRQ20 may map to a certain common mental disorder. And that's what we found here. That was that there were certain symptoms for depression, anxiety, capacity and exhaustion, and somatic, all related to mental health and well-being that we were able to map from the SRQ20 survey. The other key thing that you can see here, so this is what we found. So you can see here then from table 2, that there is then certain factors, those loadings that you saw from the last table, that those particular symptoms then loaded against those common mental disorders. And this is where Grenville Rose, our statistician from UNSW, University of New South Wales, was very helpful in helping us understand and make sense of this particular data. And so you can see here that there are certain things that then might load according to depression, anxiety, capacity, exhaustion, and somatic. So you can see here again that the data was helping us to understand what were some of the common experiences and or symptoms associated with Pacifica people and their mental health and well-being, and possible mental illnesses associated with those. As mentioned by Ursula and Shannon, we then also did the Talanoas. So we were doing both what we wanted to do a quantitative, so have more of a broader a quantity approach of being able to bring in data. So that's what we did with the surveys. But we also wanted to complement that with a qualitative research approach. And as Pacifica people may know, Talanoa is a cultural concept that we generally have shared across Oceania, but it has evolved as its own research methodology. And so we've utilised the Talanoa research methodology to also then engage with Pacifica people, Pacific Indigenous people in Greater Western Sydney. And so it was obviously the right fit, because the project was called Mental Health Talanoa, but the Talanoa research methodology was what we utilize as a qualitative approach in engaging the next part of our research. So this is where we were able to have conversations with people about their lived experience. Because again, the survey data was looking at the prevalence, and the Talanoas was then looking at impact and help-seeking behaviour, which then helped us to then meet those 3 research aims and objectives. Part of the report was then to look at the Talanoa to code them. So we did what's known as a thematic analysis. And the thematic analysis was, again, as part of the Talanoa approach, really pitched towards ensuring that what was being provided as narratives that were being provided by participants, it was very much about being able to understand and take keywords and phrases from the Talanoas to actually develop the actual key findings themselves. So the Talanoa approach as a research methodology relies heavily on ensuring that you are working directly with participants, that they are being researched with rather than over and on. So the idea of the Talanoa sessions was really pretty much us holding space as researchers to just Talanoa. And we could have gone on for hours. Most of our Talanoa just went on for about 2 hours. We had to sort of cut it off after that because it could have just gone on. And it was an exciting time to actually sit and hold space with Pacifica people and their experience of mental health and well-being. Part of the report, it is a big report in and of itself, also has a narrative analysis. So we've also then, as part of us making sense of the data along with participants, is provide in this research and resource document a narrative analysis of what we actually found off the back of this particular research project in and of itself. So this is something that we utilised as part of making sense of what was happening. So we encourage you to check out that narrative analysis. The other key thing that's actually in this report document is the survey tool. So it is possible for you to access the actual tool itself that we utilise in the actual research project itself, and that includes the SRQ20. So what we really wanted to do with this research and resources document is, again, make it a resource for people who might want to possibly pick up this particular tool that we adapted from the SRQ20 and actually possibly run with it in other locations across Australia. And the idea also was that we collected both the data from the SRQ20, but we also collected data some demographic data as well. Like, for example, what type of industry of employment are you in? What Pacifica background are you in? Which particular area of Western Sydney are you located in? So all of that particular information is within this particular document. Education is the phase that we're going to look at next. And again, Ursula and Shannon, what were some of your possible thoughts and or highlights of this part of our research project?
Oh, I'll go first this time, Shannon. I really enjoyed this part of the research. I felt like I just felt like it was probably the most kind of interesting. Not interesting, maybe, what's the word? Fun, I guess. It was more fun for me. Didn't really feel like work, but we did a lot. So we did the desktop review, the annotated review as part of the education section, I guess. But my favorite is the PIML, so the Pacific Indigenous Mental Health Lexicon is my favorite part of this whole research, I guess. Anyway, Shannon, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I remember Ursula mentioning that she was actually able to use, while we were developing the PIML, she was actually able to use some of that in her mental health support role. And it really actually helped particularly parents of young people that she was working with to communicate, certain symptoms and certain realities that the young people she was helping were facing. So that's really exciting to know something that is just so practical. It's able to translate into greater understanding. Obviously, we appreciate that sometimes accessing mental health services can be daunting for anyone, let alone people that are operating in two different worlds or more worlds. So that the gap in understanding this world and that world, that language that we've created here, I suppose, can help that. And it's really exciting to know that it's not just about Western concepts being translated into Pacific languages, but it's about the whole epistemological idea. What are the ideas that come from that culture? How are they being translated across, and how are we sharing rather than just the unilateral kind of arrangement? So I'm personally very excited to see how that takes off.
Yeah, thanks, Ursula and Shannon. And I agree. So this is the thing as to why we did this research as well, is that we wanted to nuance again. We wanted to understand Pacific Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, being and becoming, epistemologies, ontologies, and how their lived experiences intersected with mental health and well-being, including mental illnesses. And so a lot of the time when we look at mental health knowledge, especially in the Australian Western context, it's very Western, and it's very, Western. And it may not be nuanced by diverse ethnic and cultural perspectives. So really this project, including the education component that again came from the research itself, again, remember the FRET model as it was moving in and out, the various phases were informing each other. It was very much around how do we make sense of mental health and well-being, mental illnesses included, in the concept of, with Pacifica communities, with Indigenous Pacifica communities. So part of our education section of this report, of this document, has a desktop review of web-based services. So some of our outputs that we put together as part of our funding is to provide feedback on what were some of the existing resources that may exist out there in the world, both locally, regionally, and globally. We looked at this idea of what may be in existence for mainstream, but also Pacific Indigenous and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. So the idea was to look at what are some of the existing web-based services, but we also, as part of this desktop review, provided an annotated review of literature and media resources. So the idea was that we wanted to note some of those particular strengths and weaknesses of those particular resources and how they may be possibly adapted if there was additional funding or another research project that might come up in the future that may actually develop those resources within a Pacifica context. So that's what this part of the document is looking at, is the various existing resources that exist out in the community. The other key thing that we also did, and as Ursula mentioned, is the Pacific Indigenous Mental Health Lexicon. And that's where we engage in 4 particular Pacifica languages from the Pacific Islands themselves. The idea behind this project is we truly wanted to make this a regional project. So rather than us just focusing on Pacifica wellbeing here in Australia and Western Sydney, we developed the idea of, hey, how about we also talk with colleagues, health practitioners and professionals, psychologists and GPs and counsellors in Fiji, in Tonga, in Samoa, and in Vanuatu, and let's look at developing a lexicon that will further assist in our understanding, us using our own language to describe common phrases or common words that we might use when talking about mental health and well-being, including mental illnesses. Because one of the things that we're hearing, even from our Talanoa sessions, is we don't seem to have the right language to describe certain phrases associated with depression or anxiety. And even if there was existing phrases or terms, a lot of it was negatively oriented. There was a stigma attached already to the word in and of itself. So the lexicon very much was developed alongside our colleagues in the Pacific Islands themselves to provide scope for us to better understand what this actually may mean for us as Pacifica people in a strength-based way. So we'll get to that resource very soon. And I know there's possibly a couple of people that is in this space actually, that actually was involved in that from the islands themselves. So I'm going to actually encourage those people to come on screen very soon. The last phase that we're just going to review as part of our presentation and launch of this resource is the training. Again, Ursula and Shannon, what are some of your thoughts about this phase of our research project? I'm going to ask Ursula.
About the training phase of this project. I actually was really impressed with how it ended up turning out, because we ended up, because I guess I had never seen anything like this done before. So with the infographics and all the multimedia resources, I was really impressed with just the easy accessibility. And so we were able to kind of use them when they're really readily available, I guess. And with the journal club, I enjoyed that as well. It was just another space for us to kind of share our thoughts about literature, about different journal articles. And so thanks to Shannon for kind of organising that with some of our journal club members.
Thanks, Ursula. And Shannon?
Yeah, I'll pick up where Ursula left off, I suppose. Yeah, with the journal club, initially I was wondering how engagement would go with that. But we actually had we only had about 3 of the meetings, but we had some really fruitful discussions in those 3 meetings. And I know there was actually quite a desire to, thank you, Sandy, need to revive the journal club. There was quite a desire to keep doing it, because I think some of those findings, even from a practice perspective, we were really able to highlight some key issues, wrestling with things. I remember one of the things we came up with was the whole thing about cultural competency. And obviously that's a bit of a dated term now. What does it mean to be responsive to culture? How do we do that practically? And just the diversity of people that were present in those meetings. It was a really rich discussion. And I actually think, yeah, we'll see what we can do. No promises, but yeah, we're mindful of the desire to keep that going. So thank you. Thank you for everyone who participated.
Thanks, Shannon. So in this section of our report, we highlight these particular practical ways in which we were striving to develop the workforce. As we had mentioned in our research objectives, we also wanted to ensure that it wasn't just about getting information from Pacifica people, hearing it, and then it just stopped there. For us, we were very intentional at the beginning of ensuring, including our education resources that you saw in the previous phase, tangible resources that people can use in and across the community, locally, regionally, globally. And so that's why we developed and started talking about and having the journal club. And that's why we also established the infographics, which I'm now going to show after just overviewing the Mental Health Journal Club, where we had some journal articles that we then got together and discussed. So that's also in that particular part of our document. But here are our infographics, and this is where, again, we were very excited about releasing this to the world, is that our infographics provided scope for us to visually represent the empirical research data in a way on a one page that visually then provided scope for us to make sense of this. And our report and our infographics was designed by a great colleague by the name of Roy Peake, and he worked alongside Ursula and I to ensure that there was that cultural inclusion of how we were using particular styles and designs. And through that, we then developed obviously the whole report itself, but also these particular infographics to again, utilize imagery that might be of assistance in our ongoing Talanoa with Pacifica people around their mental health and well-being. So
yes, we made sure to include grandma and grandpa in this infographic.
That's it. Ursula and I were going back and to and from when some of the initial designs were coming through, and we're like, oh, what about we include this? What about we do this? We really want to make sure that, as you can see from the overview, that mental health impacts everyone, not just the individual, but also the family and the community around them. And you can see that in the bolded text at the top there. And that we really wanted to highlight that, because sometimes in a Western context, we pathologize and make mental illness very clinical in the sense of we sort of just treat the individual, and we fail to sometimes see the broader impacts on the family and wider community. So again, from that collective communal perspective, from a Pacifica Indigenous way of knowing and doing it, being and becoming, we wanted to include that in the way in which these were being represented. So
that was also, sorry, Georgie, and that was also some of the feedback we got during our Talanoa sessions about how to support family and loved ones of the person who's kind of experiencing these symptoms or mental health.
I guess one further kind of caveat that we need to mention is obviously these are not diagnostic labels. We're not suggesting that if this is presenting or if this is present in someone of a specific background, therefore it leads to. This is just a way to start conversations, and this is the beauty of it. I think it can be used very broadly for many people: GPs, mental health workers, social workers, nurses, any really allied health professional. It's just to start the conversation, to again orient conversations that are more culturally responsive, given some of the unique circumstances Pacific people might find themselves in, versus a non-Pacific person who accesses those mental health services.
Thanks, Shannon. And once again, keep in mind that these symptomology, these symptoms were mapped again according to the SRQ-20 and provide, again, an ongoing Talanoa amongst Pacifica people, young people and family members to actually start an ongoing conversation about getting additional support and assistance with their well-being. The next infographic was our Mental Health Talanoa research key themes. And this again came from mapping the SRQ-20, the quantitative alongside our qualitative, the narratives. And so you can see directly here, these are the key themes that came up with the actual Talanoa sessions. And across these particular key themes, they provide, again, an ongoing platform for us to understand what might be happening for Pacifica people, their lived experiences, their help-seeking behaviour, some of the barriers that may occur in the context of their mental health and well-being, but also how that can then manifest more broadly in the bigger picture of engagement with healthcare providers, if that is something that is happening. The next infographic is our research recommendations, and this is where we were bold to look directly again on the key words, on the key phrases, on the key themes from participants, and then draw out some of these research recommendations that will hopefully again continue the ongoing conversation with Pacifica people and people around them, the various systems. Because remember again, the FRET model, formation, research, education and training, also revolved around, you had the individual, family, community, and systems. So we're also making sure that our research recommendations were also having an impact on the way in which individuals, families, community and systems engage with Pacifica people in the context of mental health and wellbeing. Then we also had our PIMLs, our Pacific Indigenous Mental Health Lexicons. And this is a very exciting set of infographics that then were taken directly from our working groups. And it was very exciting to see this all come together. As you can see, there are particular, there was the actual terminology itself. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, there was 11 phrases that we then got translated with our working group members in Bislama, Fijian, Tongan and Samoan. And what's really exciting about these particular resources is that we've already started to receive some feedback from people utilising these resources in the community, and how positive it has been in starting that ongoing Talanoa around understanding what it means to have a mental illness, what it means to understand wellbeing within those particular Pacific languages.
And sorry, just to extend on what Shannon was saying earlier, so I did use some of the phrases that we were developing in the developing stages of the PIML when I was working with some of my clients in my clinical role last year. And I found it interesting that I used it more with the parents and the grandparents, so the carers and the loved ones of the young person who was experiencing the mental health presentation. The young people themselves didn't really, I don't know if they didn't understand the language as much, but it wasn't very helpful for the young people at the time. It was more for the parents and the family. And so I found that really interesting, but also really helpful when I was kind of liaising with them.
Thanks, Ursula. And I'm just going to encourage, we've got a couple of people actually that are from the islands that were involved. I think I saw Jofaliti and Jerry. Are they here with us still in the space? If you are, I'd love for you to just quickly turn on your camera and give us a wave if you're in the space. They might be, let me see. Can you see them, Ursula and Shannon? They might be shy. That's okay. We'll get them to possibly make comment a bit later on. But again, these particular resources was made possible because of our conversations with respective professionals in the islands themselves. And it was an exciting opportunity for us to engage with our, where we've come from as Pacifica people in the diaspora. All right, I'm going to now just look at the other last component associated with our resource. So apart from actually, obviously, part of the training phase is obviously the document itself. So the document's now available via the National Library of Australia. So the link is there for people to access, and it's also available via ResearchGate for people to download. So the actual report, don't forget that the report in and of itself was part of the training phase of the project. And obviously it documents what we've done, but it was intentionally documented as part of our outputs. And also we have our social media. We love this actually. This was a journey in and of itself. So we also have our videos on the Mental Health Talanoa YouTube channel. And that's where we literally spend no more than 5 minutes overviewing our infographics, overviewing the research project itself, and then also overviewing the PIMLs. So this is where we had some of the key people associated with the PIMLs join me in looking at how to say these particular these particular phrases, mental health phrases in those respective Pacific languages. So let me encourage you, as part of actually also engaging with this document, see those particular resources, those YouTube videos as part of our training offering to the world in regards to this particular research project itself. The other thing, of course, is our social media channels as well, which is found, and you can find out more about our social media channels by looking at our YouTube videos. On each of the YouTube videos, there's a listing of social media handle, which is at MH Talanoa. And so we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, and then we've been posting this also on LinkedIn. The idea was that obviously to have those social media pages to profile the research project, but also to house these resources so they can always sit there and people can access that accordingly. All right, so that's our actual report. So that's all very, very exciting, and we're so excited to now share that with you. What we thought we might do actually now is actually do a Q&A. And this is where I've invited these people that you can see up on the screen to be actively involved now in a question and answer. And I've got a couple of questions to start off with. And so this is where I'm going to encourage our people that are involved. So I'm going to introduce, so Mark Reynolds, if you can turn on your camera and your microphone, please. Hi, Mark. And
G'day.
Sumitra Jones from Western Sydney Local Health District. So hi, Sumitra. Mark, I should mention, is from the Ministry of Health. Then we have Saini Afiaki, who is part of the core group that was involved in instigating this project. So hi, Saini.
Malo, lelei, everyone.
Oh, and we have Mal Fruin, who is from New South Wales Council for Pacific Communities.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. And we have Tueke Kalu, who was involved as a mental health first aid participant. Is Tueke there? Talkie, sorry. Apologies. Talkie.
Kia ora.
Where are you, Talkie? I can see you somewhere on the screen.
Kia ora. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, we can't see you, but all good.
Kia ora, Taki.
Good.
Kia ora, brother.
Kia ora. And myself. Hi. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to ask the panel to keep your video and your mic on, and I'm going to start some of those direct questions first, and then I'm going to open it up to everyone else to actually ask any questions that they might have for Mark, Sumitra, Saini, Mal, Talkie, and myself. And we can do that from the chat. So start thinking about some possible questions that you might have for us as a panel, and we can go from there. Okay, so please put in your actual questions that you might be thinking off the back of that. All right. So Mark, Sumitra, Saini, now Talkie, and myself. This is my first question actually to the panel, apart from myself. Why mental health and well-being? Why?
Okay, maybe I can start if you guys don't mind. I'm trying to be a kai mua here. That's what they say in Tongan. But anyway, for me, why mental health? The idea for me personally started about 2017, 2018. I was attending 3 funerals of 3 Tongan young people that lost their life to suicide. And I attended those 3 funerals, and I watched the impact of and the devastation it has on the family, as well as their friends and their cousins. I was particularly observant of young people because they were schoolmates, their friends at uni who came. And I was wondering why? Because I don't know much about that. So I asked my other fellow Pacific Islander workers, have you been to those kind of funerals? And do you know? But actually they have been to a lot of funerals with people who have lost their lives to suicide. So I went and do my little personal research. There was nothing Pacific in Australia. New Zealand have done it. I was thinking, why do we have, what can we do? So I call up Georgie because of his brain, of course, and a few other people like Mal Fruin, New South Wales Council, other workers, be part of this little core group and put our heads together and start the Talanoa that Georgie was saying. So it was started with frustration and frustration and wanting to do something about it.
Thanks.
That's from me.
So it's Mark here. I'm from the ministry and specifically from Mental Health Children and Young People, which is a unit of the Mental Health branch. And so obviously I have a bias in thinking that mental health is a very important part of the whole human being and a vital way in which we as individuals relate to our community and our loved ones. I think particularly in the contemporary setting, mental health is an issue of great challenge for us all. And I think that we're all under various pressures, and we were anyway before, I think, what we've been seeing in the last 2 years, if not 5 years, where we have incredible impacts on people's sense of security in the world, their identity, their connection with others. And these all underpin good mental health, and they all put us at various levels of vulnerability to mental ill health. And every individual has different triggers for what sort of stresses will take them down the path to mental ill health. But I think that I became kind of aware through Seni and others' representations of the fact that I guess in Australia, Pacifica were a bit of a hidden community, and that there wasn't the same level of awareness as perhaps I'm a New Zealander originally, and so it kind of surprised me a little bit that there wasn't that kind of profile. But also I think that awareness that communities themselves were grappling with how they adapted to new communities, adapted to the modern world, and how they brought tradition with them into the modern world. And so I think this is incredibly timely, this piece of work, but I think the empowerment that the whole community has taken on board around owning what's happening for communities and really looking to support each other and really open the discussion up. So that's really exciting.
George, it's Dimitra. First is I think you spelled my name. It's Dimitra Joseph, not Jones. But
I'm so sorry. I'll fix that.
No problem. But I think I started as the operations manager for Western Sydney Local Health District Perinatal and Child Youth Mental Services back in 2016, and what I noticed when came to my attention that there were a number of young people were committing suicide, I was shocked and horrified to begin with. I mean, I didn't have the same experience as Sini did going to the funerals, but the fact that things were happening within our service, it came to dawn on me that something is wrong here from a public health service perspective. What is that we were not doing? And that how can we do something about this? And so sort of we started with all good intentions, trying to contact the schools and different agencies. But what we found, we got stuck in a little bit. But when we started through Mark from the ministry, Tanya from the ministry as well, started to have this conversation, I think this brought us together. And we all wanted to do something, but I think this gave us opportunity all us to meet together as a concerned community from health, from the PHN, from Sarah Bo from the PHN at that time, us all coming together and say, what is that we can do? And I think from that, I think we've developed, I'm really excited to be part of this group, that something good came out of that very difficult and horrible situation that led us to come together, but something good has come out from that. For me, from a personal perspective as well, is that meeting a lot of beautiful people like yourselves that are part of this, but also learning about that. And one thing which I've always keep saying to Sini is that as a district, I think from my perspective, we were not actually listening to the community. Is that I think this gave us opportunity to listen and to gain that knowledge. What is that whatever service we're providing wasn't meeting the needs. And this gave us the opportunity to listen, to say, okay, there are opportunities that come up within mental health that we want this community to be part of it, to have your voice. And having that connection is what I found that was very useful, and having the resources. And while you're going through it, I'm just in my mind going through, how is that as clinicians, can we use these resources that you have developed? How can we practically use them? One is through education, is it in services, or do we have flyers like this available to our clinicians when the young people or Pacific Islander community will attend our emergency department or appointments? How can we practically use them? And this is, as I say, this is a beginning, and I have the privilege to share this and to be part of this, but it's taking it to the next level.
Be me next. Why mental health? I think just very honoured to be part of the collective, the group. Why? Probably well overdue, but nevertheless, thank you, Saini, for bringing us together and coming together as a collective. No agendas to come, but for one purpose, and that's to what is it that we can do to work together to help our young people and our communities with mental health. And I think for many years, there's a lot of us on this group that have worked in the community like myself, and there's been some great programs there. If we don't start addressing the underlining, what's happening underneath that iceberg, we are going to be continuously chasing our tails. And so really honoured to be part of this program. Very passionate to see to work alongside those in health, PHNs. Thank you to those champions that when Saini brought us together and we sat, I still remember that very first room, the very first time that we met, and we all came together for a common cause, and that was, what is it we can do to help our communities? Often we are called upon, not Pacific Council, but many other Pacific organisations, from health and from schools, from criminal justice, from the police, as to how can we better work together to help our communities. And this project and this initiative is really the stepping stone for us to be able to address some of those issues. So for me, it's why mental health? Definitely because it's not in the Pacific, Maori and Pacific community, but in many communities, it's often a topic. It's like, let's not talk about that. No, let's talk about it. Yeah. Let's connect with those within our community and talk about it so that we can help our young people and our families. But yeah, that's me.
Kia ora, I'll just be really brief because I'm actually quite nervous. But I think as a young individual who's now a mental health support worker, and like Auntie Mel, what a privilege and honour it is to be a part of this initiative and the mahi or the work that you guys are doing. I think as also with living with somebody who has been affected by mental health severely, if only these type of initiatives or organisations or corporate bodies or programs were run back then, maybe this could have prevented a lot of the suicides from our young people and our older people to this very day, because there is, like Auntie Mel also said, there is a lot of, in our culture, there's that it's taboo, or it's, you know, you don't speak about it, or don't tell anyone else that, because they might look down upon our family or our whānau. When I think irrelevant to that now, it's really rampant how much our young Islander people want to take their life because of depression and anxiety and all those other type of mental health illnesses, or whatever you want to call them. I think that this program is going to be one of the most important keys and stepping stones to making a change in our communities, to restoring our generation, or my generation of the young people, restoring that hope and that purpose back into their life, and feeling like, you know, you've got someone to reach out to, because it's quite hard for our people to reach out to, as they would say, Pākehā, white Western, clinicians or whatever. And the more of us that are out there, the more Mauri or Pacific or, Rarotongan or all those different type of Pacific clinicians or support workers out there. I really feel like it's going to be more of a safe space for us to open up to, and not feel like not sit in the dark and feel like we haven't got anybody, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's I think what you guys are doing is absolutely amazing, and I'm just grateful to be here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have done your guys' mental health first aid, because that is a part of the reason why I now am a mental health support worker. So yeah, thank you guys for having me on tonight, and bless you, my brother Shan. It's very good to see you again.
Likewise, sis.
Yeah.
Thanks, Talki. Thank you so much. We've had a couple of questions that are coming in through the chat, which is fantastic, and Shannon's helping to add to some of them. And I'll also pose some of those to the panel in after my next formal question. I've only got one other formal question, and then I'm going to go back to the chat. So my next question to our panel is this resource. By the way, the panel had no idea what questions I was going to ask them. So the question is, this resource? Who would like to go first?
Well, this resource is very useful, not just here in New South Wales, but nationally for health workers or any other service that will be working with our community relating to mental health, let alone that it would be used in Oceania, all those islands that have those languages translated. And I am just thinking that Perinatal and Sumindra and them would be taking up the framework and go with that, because we've been invited by Dr. Ariana to join their group, because they will be translating, they would like to translate some of their terms into different languages, and we are ready. Sumindra, you can convey that to your boss.
Yes, I think it's a very good question, Georgie. With the resources, why do we put sort of a lot of work into it? And I think just a slightly different from that is that I think this opportunity with this that was able to, when Sini just mentioned about the perinatal literacy grant came on, to have a part of that. And I think that's where this has grown from. It is that, giving, when things come up, we have the opportunity to say, what about, let's include the Pacific Island Committee in the new innovations that's coming up. So with this resource, what I would like to see is that how we can unpack that so that our clinicians can use it. How do we unpack this so that the clinician understand it and to use it in the level where they see in their clinical work, when they want to understand is, how do we ask the questions? How do we, in a very respectful way, and to understand the culture, so that, we use language that they will understand. And sometimes, we might use the word, we might not be able to use the word accurately, but actually have a brochure, or to say that, this is what we're actually talking about. I apologize, I don't know, I might not be pronouncing correctly, but this is what we are looking at. And, how do we, what is the next phase for us to use that? And happy for us to be, as I said, always, is that for us to use as a pilot project from here, that we have a small group of clinicians using that to unpack that. How do we use this practically in the coalface?
Mm. Yeah.
So it's Mark here. I might just kind of pick up on what Sumitra has said. And for me, I think it's a fantastic platform from which, the visibility of the community and the visibility of mental health then becomes something that's a bit of a two-way kind of communication tool. So out into the wider community, where there's the legitimacy and the respect that's paid to people to demonstrate that this is a significant issue, and that we have some evidence to kind of engage better in a conversation. And likewise, I think it's an opportunity now to be able to say, well, when invitations for grants come up or something that can underpin the evidence base about what's needed, how you might be able to go forward. I think it really does provide opportunities in that way. And I guess I'm mindful of what Georgie and Seni has said before about the fact that there really wasn't anything speaking to the mental health experience of Pacifica of Australia. And, this takes it into the public forum. And, I kind of also want to throw this back to Georgie and say, look, how's this been received within the sort of the wider academic community, including in New Zealand, where I think they've done some fantastic work. But I think this stands alone and something of a unique sort of community-led kind of piece of information, and the fact that it has those components of the voices of the community, and also the tools, and then the training. I think it's a really interesting package to open up a wider conversation and lead to other things.
Okay, can I interrupt and ask Dr. Oletanga? She's a general practitioner. As a clinician, I think I posed my question there. You are a Pacific Island practitioner, a qualified medical doctor. How would you use it, doctor?
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me, everyone? Malo lelei. I love for this opportunity. Look, I'm just absolutely amazed by your work, Georgie, and your team. Well done. I think for us as GPs, we are at the moment fighting through a pandemic. We're very busy, but this is an important resource. I think it has a role. I'm just wondering, so I put some questions through. You really need to launch it with our PHN. Sydney is so big. I am part of the Southwest District. Afiaki is part of the Western District. You need to somehow bring it out to all of us. There's only a few of us, Dr. Panyani Patu and Dr. Fuliaki, there's only a few of us that probably have our own practices, but you need to put it out. A lot of GPs see a lot of Pacific Health. I do a lot of work with other practices, and we don't have that knowledge. So speaking for non-Pacific, but a lot of our patients are Pacific. So it's not an uncommon entity, all the work you've presented, but you do need to bring it out to us. So maybe through funding and lots of work, training programs. And then the only other question is the psychologists have been given a huge budget the last few financial years. So they need to get the resources out there, because usually what we do in general practice, we're so busy, we will refer to our psychologists, and they may not have the tools at their fingertips to be able to talk to our young people or talk to a lot of our people that are suffering from this. So, you know, that's where you need to go. And the workforce, we need to promote really good Pacific and many other types of multicultural young people to come into the workforce and be trained in mental health things, because if it's not, yes, we will have an increase in unemployment, all the things that go with depression and anxiety. And that's the issue that we have. And so we need to really promote education and lots of good mindsets for our young people, because with that they can fight fears of not being good enough to be a health professional, whether it be an allied health worker, such as a podiatrist, a dietitian, a psychologist. All these things we need to bring up our workforce, because by doing that, we then have the abilities to deal with these issues at their very, very early stages. And even our teachers, you know, you've got to look at where the avenues you're going to need to promote your resource. So it might even have to be schools, PATH, you know, the universities there need to know about these, but it is a huge area. And, you know, I'm just hearing it now, and I'm one of the many districts that we have, but you need to bring it out to all of us.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor.
That's fantastic. That's so helpful for us to hear directly as part of what we're doing. I want to also hear from Mal.
Yep.
Okay, as well.
About how we would use the resource.
Yeah, this
we like Auntie Joyce said, we were delivering to the Fijian community the mental health first aid training, and we just popped those resources up on that PowerPoint, and they were already engaged in our training, but it just gave another level to be able for them to be able to see that resource up on that PowerPoint on the big screen and read it in their language. So that was really something that was really rewarding for Joy and I, and to be able to explain to them or share with them the journey of them being part of this training. And this training, the mental health first aid training, delivered by Pacific mental health educators or trainers, and that the bigger picture to this as well was this research. So I agree with what Ursula said. Like for the older generation, they linked straight away to what we were sharing in our class, and that being the resources and the research. And another thing that it would be used for certainly needs to be out there, like what the doctor said, in the schools, in the juvenile centres, and it needs to get out there, and that's going to be something that we would all be working on and guided by you, Georgie, and your team. And of course, the other thing that it certainly can be used for, and it's called the funding. Of course, now you have the research document. So when you start looking at other funding opportunities, you have this document that we can use to look for more funding and to work towards other initiatives in helping our community.
Yeah. I think we working now with the PHN as well as many other connecting groups. Kia ora Tānti Moana on here. I definitely think that it would be important for you guys to get flyers that yous are able to, they call them the A5 flyer, that you're able to present to GPs, psychologists, psychiatrists, and also doing a presentation like our sister just finished saying, the doctor, about going into the schools and stuff. Even if we recently done a presentation for one of the UN Mind programs through One Door Mental Health, and we had our admin send out just an automated email to everyone within the local Southwest Sydney area, and we had a massive turnout there, and now we're getting an influx of people who are wanting to access the resources and the programs. And I definitely think this is something that really needs to get out on the front line. It's something that is so important to myself and everyone else who's sitting here tonight, a part of this meeting. It would impact our communities, our cultures, this country, many other countries, our Pacific countries. But yeah, I would definitely encourage if you get out there, do the presentations, because this resource is something that we all need to get a hold of, myself and my whānau included. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tauki. I think it's really important. We can actually further profile, and I'm going to go to some of the questions that have come up from the chat that have yet to be answered. One of the key things that we were intentional of doing is people are able to do a Google search now of Mental Health Talanoa, and it will now come up with the report, even with the YouTube channel. A lot of the links on videos will direct people to the report. Even the infographics, so we've stored them individually as their own PDF files, and people can access that and actually then print that and actually post it up on their clinic wall. And that's exactly what Toki was just saying, is that how do we ensure that this can be visibly represented and seen across those particular areas? And I agree with you. I think it's about making sure that it's mobilized. Got a couple of other questions, and please continue to have these questions coming through in the chat, and again, Shannon's helping answer them. I've got a question directly from Trey, who's also part of our core group. Can I ask Marcus and Dimitra, how has this experience been for you working with our community, with Pacifica communities, over the past 3 years on this project?
Look, I'll start, but I think Dimitra is at the coalface, and so I think she may well have already alluded to the value of having that connection to community and to be able to hear the direct voice of community, and I think that that's vital. Look, I think for me, there was, that beginning opportunity after Sienna and others reached out to us to facilitate a bit of a forum with a whole range of services, including education and the PHN and the local health district, mental health services, and community organisations. It really was quite an overwhelming experience of people really very enthusiastic about having an opportunity to come together and to see how we could kind of begin that conversation, to listen to what the issues are, and to start mapping out what we might be able to do about it. And I guess two things I want to say. One is that I think that the fact that this was generated from the community and had such strong advocacy and passion from the community, and that it's been not only inspirational, but it's been the backbone of actually getting this initiative going. But also I do want to acknowledge Sarah Bow and Went West, who really were able to come to this with an enormous willingness for intellectual input, financial resources, connections to local services. And so it really has been an example, I think, of community, both of people and of organisations coming together to do something new. And to actually open a conversation that hadn't been had before. A lot of those organisations were aware that they weren't connecting with the Pacifica community particularly well, and we're desperate to. So it's become, it provided that forum for that, and I think it has remained an initiative that's at the core led by and owned by the community. And, you know, I think that's amazing. From my point of view, I get a chance to kind of support the delivery of more systems-based kind of responses. And we have an enormous amount of attention at the moment on children and young people and their mental health as we go through COVID, and we've gone through, you know, the bushfires and everything, and seeing that vulnerability. And so, you know, we can talk in a kind of a theoretical sense about vulnerable communities and vulnerable people, but this is an example of how the community actually rises to meet those services and finds some way to actually make that connection and make it work for you and for us.
Agree with you, Mark. I think I really enjoyed working with the team, and gave me the opportunity to do to make a difference, if you like. And also, I think one of the things is just having the network, and the most important network is Sini. Whenever I something new comes up and I need some information or need some advice, I will just pick up the phone and speak to Sini. And the other wonderful person that's always been helpful is Mel. You know, I think about a few months ago when we were putting together the grant, it was a very last minute phone call, and she was able to get the support letter, everything through to go through that. The other one was, I think about a few months ago when we were putting together a flyer to give information to families when on discharge from hospital. If your child has got thoughts of self-harm, how do you manage that? And we wanted to put a contact for specific Islander community family members. And I reached out to Mel. Mel said, just put that address in. And small things like this, that, you know, having that network and connection, that when things come up, that you're able to pick up the phone, and it's a two-way thing. And if Sini wants something, or Mel, that they got my number. So I think that networking that's come from this, that has sort of make us grow. And, you know, I'm looking forward for us to grow together and look at opportunities, and to make sure that, you know, I think this will help us to save lives in the community growing together. My only other question of interest is that I know, especially in the community, it is the whole family, like the picture that you showed. You know, it involves the grandparents, and its extended family is part of a family. As we move forward with the new generations coming on, I think at the moment, because from my perspective, we're looking at the family and the younger population, as they grow on, I think we need to look at how the next generation of Pacific Islander children, how are we going to meet their needs? Because they are sort of coming to next level. Yes, they got grandparents and that, but how do we go? Maybe 20 years time, 30 years time, where do we see?
Thanks, Dimitra. And I agree with you. And that's a really nice segue, actually, because I know we've only got 5 minutes left, and I actually wanted to pose that question. But before I do that, I do want to further highlight that, yes, I think this project and what was being shared really has been platformed on that relational approach. As Pacific Indigenous people, we're very relationally driven. So being able to have those relationships formed, especially as we move towards the next part of this journey, we hope that those relationships, at the individual, at the family, at the community, at the societal level, will continue to promote a mental health talanoa. Please join me in thanking our panel. Mark, Dimitra, Saini, Mao, Toki, and thank you so much, panel. Yay! What I wanted to do in the last 4 minutes that we have left is actually put it over to everyone else. So feel free, actually, if you want to put on your video, because I'd love for people to actually wave to everyone as a community. So feel free to put on your video and wave to each other. But I actually have a question that I want to ask you to answer in the chats. Oh, look at all these people. It's so good to see all these people waving. Love it, love it, love it. I just want to quickly propose this question. as part of our conversation. Here it is, just for the recording. Where to from here? Where to from here? So I'd love for you to start writing in the chat this particular response, because this is what we were really talking about. It's one thing to have this research and resources, but what does it mean for yourselves as individuals who are part of families, who are part of communities, who are part of systems within the broader society? As Pacific and non-Pacific people, how will you continue to undertake a mental health talanoa? So I'd really love for people to put that in the chat. I'm gonna close that sharing again, because I love seeing everyone's faces on the screen as we wrap up in the next 3 minutes. But I just really want to encourage people to put in the chat function, where to from here? It might be a short reflection on, oh, I'm going to access this document and I'm going to further look at how I might be able to further inform my understanding of mental illnesses. Or it might be, I might take this and speak with my relatives about this. I've done that personally. I've had some really interesting conversations with my father and other family members across the Pacifica community. And it's been really encouraging for them to hear some of the even terminology, let alone some of the concepts that we've developed. So I'm seeing now here in the conversation, it's stuff to do with sharing it with the networks across Australia and PNG. Thanks, Dottie. Looking at, we've got a lot of positive conversations and affirmations in regards to this particular work itself. We've got dissemination and use of research and further funding to continue the multi-pronged approach. I like that. Thanks, Bruce and Inez. Inez, I agree with you, especially if we can also look at other states and territories. I know Inez is joining us from Queensland. There's some really, really good comments, and it's real. And I'm loving these comments because for us, this is part of the ongoing conversation. This is all about being able to promote scope for us to share with each other and learn from each other, to utilize this information as a bigger part of us working collaboratively, collectively, as we strive to create an ongoing mental health talanoa. Vinaka Vakalevu, everyone. Thank you so much. Again, on behalf of the research team, Shannon and Ursula, thank you so much for attending our launch, our research and resources launch. The link is available. If you've registered and included your shipping address in your registration, we will get a hard copy of the report out to you. We're going to post it out to you wherever you are in the world. And we're hoping that we can be connected again through this particular project. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm now based at the University of Sydney, so please feel free to email me as part of our ongoing conversations. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.